Hey guys, it's reading day, and we're going to be reading from Scottish Ghost Stories by Elliot O'Donnell. We'll be right back.
Grab your popcorn and snacks. Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust. Turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin.
Hey everybody, welcome to the show. Welcome, happy Sunday. Let me get TikTok going here because we are also live on TikTok this afternoon. So let me get the button pushed here. Make sure I've got all my buttons before I hit up TikTok. Okay, all right. Okay. Hey everybody, welcome to California Haunts Radio. It is Sunday. My name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour or so. I'm also the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team based out of Sacramento, California. We're 45 strong up and down the state, which means if you have a paranormal need, we can get to you. It might take us a while, but we can get to you. And in the case that we can't get to you right away, we do have psychics on staff who can phone you and talk with you about what may or may not be going on in your residence or business. That being said, we can be found all over the web. As you can see, we're on TikTok and everything. You know, we're everywhere. Tonight, we are broadcasting to TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. So we're broadcasting to 4 different places. Welcome, TikTok. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Unfortunately, because you're on my cell phone, I cannot see your comments. But thank you very much. I do know you're there. I can see you come up. Today, we're going to be reading a ghost story. And, probably a couple ghost stories. They're supposed to be true Scottish ghost stories, and these were written in the early 1800s, so some of the stuff that, might offend us maybe in here, I'm going to try and read through it a little bit, okay? I don't speak Gaelic, I don't speak Scottish, or anything like that, so the last time I did a book, a German book that I was reading, it was pretty funny because of the way I was trying to say the words. So I'll do my best saying it. And I also got a note on this book that some of the translations aren't as good as they should be. So that's going to be interesting reading this today too. Anyway, so this book is written by Elliot O'Donnell. And he was a writer back in the 1800s, and he was really into ghosts and paranormal. I hope you guys enjoy this. I do this every Sunday, and it gives everybody just a chance to slide into their weekends. For some of you, it's already Sunday, right? Okay, but anyway, hopefully, you enjoy this book, and I know I'm going to enjoy this book. It was a choice between this one and A History of Werewolves in the World, and that'll be the next book up. This book is copyright free from the Gutenberg project. You can just go over there and you can choose whatever books you want over there, and they're all free, and you can read them online or do what you will. Thank you for the happy hearts. I would like to do a goal of those. Can we hit 1,000 of those during the show today? Just keep tapping your screen for me. See if we can hit 1,000 or maybe 5,000 even. I'm trying to get this thing started, right? And I'd really appreciate it, if I could get this thing started and going. I really would. Share this live with other people as well. Over on Facebook, because I know I've got people watching from Facebook and YouTube today. If you could show me some thumbs up and things like that to show me some love for this read, please do so. You can chat in my chat room. That helps. And also, if you haven't done so already, follow me on Facebook. Hit that follow button, or hit that subscribe button on YouTube because we're trying to do that. And follow me over here on TikTok. Okay. Like I said, this is an older book. So some of the words in here, some of the descriptions may not be good for today. I'll do my best to sort through them. Otherwise, I'll let you know ahead of time when something offensive is coming. Don't get upset. Please don't turn me into the TikTok police or the Facebook police or anything like that. It's just the way the book's written, and I'll do my best. All right. We also have a pin goal up there. I would like 50 night helms because I think it's kind of cool to have the night helms that I'm reading Scottish ghost stories. Right. So remember, this book is by Elliot O'Donnell, And again, it was written, I believe, around 1811. So that'll give you an idea. So the book has assorted ghost stories in there and all kinds of things. So please hit the, if you like what you hear, help me out. Keep tapping that screen for likes. You guys out here in Facebook land and everywhere, show me some happy heart. I can never do the heart. Show me some happy hearts and that kind of thing. All right? Show me some love. All right, so here we go. I'll be reading off my tablet. So enjoy it. Grab some cocoa, like I usually say in the beginning on Facebook, grab some cocoa, grab a drink, grab a snack, sit, put your fuzzy slippers on. The inextinguishable candle of the old White House. Here we go. Pitlochry. I'm trying, okay? It's already starting. So let me get in here, and I'm going to enlarge this because I'm blind. So this thing was having issues enlarging, and I'm trying to get it as large as I can to read it. Okay. I want to make sure I'm on the right page. Yes, I am. Okay, I'm going to go as high as I can for my old ass eyes. So here we go. Let's wait for it to do it. For some reason, it's slowing down, magnifying. Okay, so here we go. Scottish Ghost Stories by Elliot O'Donnell. Several years ago, been on revisiting Perthshire, a locality which had great attractions for me as a boy. I answered an advertisement in the Popular Ladies Weekly. As far as I can recollect, it was somewhat to this effect. Comfortable home offered to a gentleman, a bachelor, at moderate terms, in an elderly Highland lady's house at Pitlochry. Pitlochry, okay? Must be a strict teetotaler and non-smoker. FM, box, so-and-so. The naive and originality of the advertisement pleased me. The idea of obtaining as a boarder a young man combining such virtues as abstinence from alcohol and tobacco amused me vastly. And then a bachelor, too. Does she mean to make love to him herself? The sly old thing. She took care to insert the epithet elderly in order to avoid suspicion. And there was no doubt about it. She thirsted for matrimony. Being tabooed by all the men who had even as much as caught a passing glimpse of her. This was her last resource. Her last resource, she would entrap some unwary stranger, a man with money, of course, and inveigle him into marrying her. And there rose up before me visions of a tall, angular, 40-year-old Scottish spinster, with high cheekbones, ruddy but sandy hair, and brawny arms. The sort of woman that ought not to have been a woman at all. The sort that sets all my teeth on edge. Yet, I read this Pitlochry, okay? Heavenly Pitlochry. Maybe Pitlochry. And there was no one else advertising in that town. That I should suit her in every respect but the matrimonial, I did not doubt. I can pass muster at any company as a teetotaler. I abominate tobacco, leastways it abominates me, which amounts to much about the same thing. And I am, or rather, I can be, tolerably amendable, if my surroundings are not positively infernal, and there are no county council children within shooting distance. But for once my instincts were wrong. The advertiser, a Miss Flora MacDonald of Donald House, did not resemble my preconception of her in any respect. She was of medium height and dainty build, a fairy-like creature clad in rustling silks, with wavy white hair, bright blue eyes, straight delicate features and hands, the shape and slenderness of which at once pronounced her a psychic. She greeted me with all the stately courtesy of the old school. This is where it gets fun. My portmanteau was taken upstairs by a solemn-eyed lad in the MacDonald tartan, and the tea bell rang me down to a most appetizing repast of strawberries and cream, scones, and delicious buttered toast. Now I'm hungry. I fell in love with my hostess. It would be a sheer sacrilege to designate such a divine creature by the vulgar term of landlady at once. When one's impressions of a place are at first exalted, they are often later on apt to become equally abased. In this case, however, it was otherwise. My appreciation both of Miss Flora MacDonald and of her house daily increased. The food was all that could be desired, and my bedroom, sweet with the perfume of jasmine and roses, presented such a picture of dainty cleanliness as awakened me feelings of shame, that I should be defiled by all my dusty travel-worn accoutrements. I flatter myself that Miss MacDonald liked me also. That she did not regard me altogether as one of the common herd was doubtless, in some degree, due to the fact that she was a Jacobite. And in a discussion on the associations of her romantic namesake, Flora MacDonald, with Perthshire, it leaked out that our respective ancestors had commanded battalions for Louis XVI's far-famed Scottish and Irish brigades. That discovery bridged gulfs. We were no longer pair and paid. We were friends. Friends for life. A week or so after I had settled in her home, I took at her suggestion a rest, and, I quite agree with her, it was a very necessary rest from my writing, and spent the day on Loch Tay, leaving again for Donawary House at 7 o'clock in the evening. It was a brilliant, moonlit night, not a cloud in the sky, and the landscape stood almost as clearly as in the daytime. I cycled, and after a hard but thoroughly enjoyable spell of pedaling, eventually came to a standstill on the high road a mile or two from the first lights of Pitlochry. I halted, not through fatigue, for I was almost as fresh as when I started, but because I was entranced with the delightful atmosphere and wanted to draw in a few really deep draughts of it before turning into bed. My halting place was on a triangular plot of grass at the junction of four roads. I propped my machine against a hedge and stood with my back leaning against a signpost, and my face in the direction whence I'd come. I remained in this attitude for some minutes, probably 10, and was about to remount my bicycle, when suddenly I became icy cold, and a frightful, hideous terror seized and gripped me so hard that the machine, slipping from my palsied hands, fell to the ground with a crash. The next instant, something, for the life of me, I knew not what, its outline was so blurred and indefinite, alighted on the open space in front of me with a soft thud, and remained standing as bolt upright as a cylindrical pillar. From afar off, there then came the low rumble of wheels, which momentarily grew in intensity, until they thundered into view of a wagon, way down beneath a monstrous stack of hay, on the top of which sat a man in a wide-brimmed straw hat, engaged in a deep confabulation with a boy in corduroys who sprawled beside him. The horse, catching sight of the motionless thing opposite me, at once stood still and snorted violently. The man cried out, "Hey, hey! What's the matter with ye, beast?" And then, in a hysterical kind of screech, "Great God! What's yon figure that I see? What's yon figure, Thomas?" The boy immediately raised himself into a kneeling position, and, clutching hold of the man's arm, screamed, I dinna ken, Matthew. But take heed, mon, it does not touch me. It's me it's come after, not ye." The moonlight was so strong that the faces of the speakers were revealed to me with extraordinary vividness, and their horrified expressions were even more startling than was the silent, ghastly figure of the unknown. The scene comes back to me here, in my little room in Norwood, with its every detail as clearly marked as on the night it was first enacted. The long range of cone-shaped mountains, darkly silhouetted against the silvery sky, and seemingly hushed in gasping expectancy, the shining scaly surface of some far-off tarn or river, perceptible only at intervals, owing to the thick clusters of gently nodding pines. The whitewashed walls of cottages glistening amid the dark green denseness of the thickly leaved box trees, and the light, feathery foliage of the golden laburnum, the undulating meadows, bespeckled with gorse and grotesquely molded crags of granite, the dazzling white rose, saturated with moonbeams, all were overwhelmed with the stillness that belongs only to the mountains and trees and plains, the stillness of the shadowland. I even counted the buttons, the horn buttons, on the rustics' coats. One was missing from the man's, 2 from the boys, and I even noted the sweat stains underneath the armpits of Matthew's shirt, and the dents and tears in Thomas' soft wide awake. I'm sorry, I think it's tears, and the dents and tears in Thomas' soft wide awake. See what I mean? I observed all these trivialities and more besides. I saw the abrupt rising and falling of the man's chest as his breath came in sharp jerks. The stream of dirty saliva that oozed from between his blackberry-stained lips and dribbled down his chin. I saw their hands, the man's square-fingered black black-nailed, I'm sorry about that, big-veined, shining with perspiration, and clutching grimly at the reins. The boys, smaller, and if anything rather more grimy. The one pressed flat down on the hay, the other extended in front of him, the palms stretched outwards, and all the fingers widely apart. And while these minute particulars, while these minute, that's what I gotta watch, particulars were being driven into my soul, the cause of it all, the indefinable, esoteric column, stood silent and motionless against the hedge, a baleful glow emanating from it. The horse suddenly broke the spell, dashing its head forward. It broke off at a gallop, and, tearing frantically past the phantasm, went helter-skelter down the road to my left. I then saw Tavis turning a somersault, miraculously saved from falling, head first onto the road, by rebounding from the pitchfork, which had been wedged upright in the hay, whilst the figure, which followed in their wake with prodigious bounds, was apparently trying to get at him with its spidery arms. But whether it succeeded or not, I cannot say, for I was so uncontrollably fearful lest it should return to me that I mounted my bicycle and rode as I had never ridden before, and I have never ridden since. I described the incident to Miss MacDonald on my return. She looked very serious. "It was stupid of me not to have warned you," she said. That particular spot in the road has always, at least, ever since I can remember, borne the reputation of being haunted. None of the peasants round here will venture within a mile of it after twilight. So the carters you saw must have been strangers. No one has ever seen the ghost except in the misty form in which it appeared to you. It does not frequent the place every night. It only appears periodically, and its method never varies. It leaps over a wall or hedge, remains stationary till someone approaches, and then pursues them with monstrous springs. The person it touches invariably dies within a year. I will recollect when I was in my teens, on just such a night as this, driving home with my father from the Lady Colin Furner's croquet party at Burr Ethel. When we got to the spot you name, the horse shied, and before I could realize what had happened, we were racing home at a terrific pace. My father and I sat in front, and the groom, a Highland boy from the valley of Beniglo, behind. Never having seen my father frightened, his agitation now alarmed me horribly, and the more so as my instinct told me it was caused by something other than the mere bolting of the horse. I was soon enlightened. A gigantic figure, with leaps and bounds, suddenly overtook us, and thrusting out its long, thin arms, touched my father lightly on the hand, and then, with a harsh cry, more like that of some strange animal than that of a human being, disappeared. Neither of us spoke till we reached home. I did not live here then, but in a house on the other side of the cry, when my father, who was still as white as a sheet, took me aside and whispered, "Whatever you do, Flora, don't breathe a word of what has happened to your mother, and never let her go along on that road at night." It was the death boggle. I shall die within 12 months. And he did. Miss MacDonald paused. A brief silence ensued, and she then went on with all her customary briskness. I cannot describe the thing any more than you can, except that it gave me the impression it had no eyes. But what it was, whether the ghost of a man, woman, or some peculiar beast, I could not for the life of me tell. Now, Mr. O'Donnell, have you had enough horrors for one evening, or would you like to hear just one more? Knowing that sleep was utterly out of the question, and that one or two more thrills would make very little the difference of my already shattered nerves, I replied that I would listen eagerly to anything she could tell me, however horrible. My permission thus gained, and gained so readily, Miss MacDonald, not without I noticed one or two apprehensive glances at the slightly rustling curtains, began her narrative, which ran, as nearly as I can remember, as follows. After my father's death, hang on one second, it's adjusting. I don't know why it's doing this to adjust, but let's see, okay, got it. After my father's death, I told my mother about our adventure the night we drove home from Lady Colin Furner's party, and asked her if she remembered ever having heard anything that could possibly account for the phenomenon. After a few moments' reflection, this is the story she told me. The inextinguishable candle of the old White House. So we're continuing with this. Remember, if you like what you hear, double tap that screen. Please double tap that screen. I'm trying to reach at least 1,500 hearts tonight, 1,500 likes. So if you can do that for me, I'd appreciate it. And then I have a goal of 50 knights helms. All right, here we go. There was once a house known as the Old White House. They used to stand by the side of the road, close to where you say the horse first took fright. Some people of the name of Holkit, relations of dear old Sir Arthur Holkit, and great friends of ours, used to live there. Their house, it was popularly believed, had been built on the site of an ancient burial ground. Everyone used to say it was haunted, and the Holkits had great trouble in getting servants. The appearance of the haunted house did not belly its reputation, for its gray walls, somber garden, gloomy hall, dark passages, and staircase and sinister-looking attics could not have been more thoroughly suggestive of all the kinds of ghostly phenomena. Moreover, the whole atmosphere of the place, no matter how hot or bright the sun, was cold and dreary, and it was a constant source of wonder to everyone how Lady Holkit could live there. She was, however, always cheerful, and used to tell me that nothing would induce her to leave that spot, dear to so many generations of her family, and associated with the happiest recollections in her life. She was very fond of company, and there was scarcely a week in the year in which she had not someone staying with her. I can only remember her as a widow, her husband a major in the Gordon Highlanders, having died in India before I was born. She had 2 daughters, Margaret and Alice, both considered very handsome, but some years older than I. This difference in age, however, did not prevent our being on very friendly terms, and I was constantly invited to their house, in the summer to croquet and archery, in the winter to balls. Like most elderly ladies of that period, Lady Holkit was very fond of cards, and she and my mother used frequently to play bezique and cribbage. I never heard that. Whilst the girls, I heard of cribbage, but not bezique. Whilst the girls and I indulged in something rather more frivolous. On those occasions, the carriage always came for us at 10. Since my mother, for some reason or other, I had a shrewd suspicion of it, was on account of the alleged haunting, would never return home after that time. When she accepted an invitation to a ball, it was always conditionally that Lady Holkit would put both of us up for the night, and the carriage used then to come for us the following day after 1 o'clock luncheon. I shall never forget the last time I went to a dance at the Old White House, though it is now rather more than 50 years ago. My mother had not been very well for some weeks, so she thought, taken cold internally. She had not had a doctor, partly because she did not feel ill enough, and because the only medical man near us, because the only medical man near us was an apothecary, of whose skill she had a very poor opinion of. My mother had quite made up her mind to accompany me to the ball, but at the last moment, the weather being appalling, she yielded to advice, and my Aunt Nora, who happened to be staying with us at the time, chaperoned me instead. It was snowing when we set out, and as it snowed all through the night and most of the next day, the roads were completely blocked, and we had to remain at the Old White House from Monday evening till the following Thursday. Aunt Nora and I occupied separate bedrooms, and mine was at the end of a long passageway, away from everyone. Prior to this, my mother and I had always shared a room, the only really pleasant one, so I thought, in the house, overlooking the front lawn. But on this occasion, there being a number of visitors, belated like ourselves, we had to squeeze in wherever we could. And as my aunt and I were to have separate rooms, my aunt liking a room to herself, it was natural that she should be allotted the largest and most comfortable. Consequently, she was domiciled in the wrong wing where all the other visitors slept, whilst I was forced to retreat to a passage on the other side of the house, where, with the exception of my apartment, there were none other but lumber rooms. All went smoothly and happily, and nothing interrupted the harmony of our visit, till the night before we returned home. We had had supper. Our meals were differently arranged in those days, and Margaret and I were ascending the staircase on our way to bed, when Alice, who had run upstairs ahead of us, met us with a scared face. "Oh, do come to my room," she cried. "Something has happened to Mary." Mary was one of the housemaids. We both accompanied her, and on entering her room, found Mary seated on a chair, sobbing hysterically. One only had to glance at the girl to see that she was suffering from some very severe shock. Though normally red-cheeked and placid, in short, a very healthy, stolid creature, and the last person to be easily perturbed, she was now without a vestige of color, whilst the pupils of her eyes were dilated with terror, and her entire body, from the crown of her head to the soles of her feet, shook as if with ague. I was immeasurably shocked to see her. "Why, Mary," Margaret exclaimed, "whatever is the matter? What has happened?" "It's the candle, miss," the girl gasps. "The candle in Miss Trevor's room. I can't put it out." "You can't put it out? Why, what nonsense," Margaret said. "Are you mad?" "It's as true as I sit here, miss," Mary panted. "I put the candle on the mantelpiece while I set the room to rights, and when I had finished and come to blow it out, I couldn't. I blew and blew and blew, but it hadn't any effect. And then I grew afraid, horribly afraid." And here she buried her face in her hands and shuddered. "I've never been frightened like this before, miss." She returned slowly, and I've come away and left the candle burning. "How absurd of you," Margaret scolded. "We must go and put it out at once. I have a good mind to make you come with us, Mary. But there, stay where you are, and for the goodness' sake, stop crying, or every one in the house will hear you." So saying, Margaret hurried off, Alice and I accompanying her, and on arriving outside my room, the door of which was wide open, we perceived the lighted candle standing in the position Mary had described. I looked at the girls, and perceived, in spite of my endeavors not to perceive it, the unmistakable signs of a great fear of something they suspected but dared not name, lurking in the corners of their eyes. "Who will go first?" Margaret demanded. No one spoke. "Well, then," she continued, "I will." And, suiting the action to the word, she stepped over the threshold. The moment she did so, the door began to close. "This is curious," she cried. "Push." We did. We all three pushed. But, despite our efforts, the door came resolutely to, and we were shut out. Then, before we had time to recover from our astonishment, it flew open. But before we could cross the threshold, it came violently to in the same manner as before. Some unseen force held it against us. "Let us make one more effort," Margaret said, "and if we don't succeed, we will call for help." I see I'm sitting crooked. That's kind of funny. Obeying her instructions, we once again pushed. I was nearest the handle, and in some manner how, none of us could ever explain, just as the door opened of its own accord, I slipped and fell inside. The door then closed immediately with a bang, and, to my unmitigated horror, I found myself alone in the room. For some seconds, I was spellbound, and could not even collect my thoughts sufficiently to frame a reply to the piteous entreaties of the Holkits, who had kept banging on the door and imploring me to tell them what was happening. Never in the hideous excitement of the nightmare had I experienced such a terror as the terror that room conveyed to my mind. Though nothing was to be seen, nothing but the candle, the light of which was peculiarly white and vibrating, I felt the presence of something inexpressibly menacing and horrible. It was in the light, the atmosphere, the furniture, everywhere. On all sides of it surrounded me. On all sides I was threatened in a manner that was strange and deadly, something suggesting to me that the source of evil originated in the candle, and that if I could succeed in extinguishing the light, I should be free myself from the ghostly presence. I advanced towards the mantelpiece, and, drawing in a deep breath, blew with the energy born of desperation. It had no effect. I repeated my efforts. I blew frantically, madly, but all to no purpose. The candle still burned softly and mockingly. Then a fearful terror seized me, and, flying to the opposite side of the room, I buried my face against the wall and waited for what the sickly beatings of my heart warned me was coming. Constrained to look, I only very, very slightly moved round, and there, floating stealthily towards me through the air, came the candle, the vibrating, glowing, baleful candle. I hid my face again and prayed God to let me faint. Nearer and nearer drew the light, Wilder and wilder the wrenches at the door. Closer and closer I pressed myself to the wall, and then, when the final throes of agony were more than a human heart and brain could stand, there came the suspicion, the suggestion of a touch so horrid that my prayers were at last answered, and I fainted. When I recovered, I was in Margaret's room, and half a dozen well-known forms were gathered round me. It appears that with the collapse of my body to the floor, the door that had so effectually resisted every effort to turn the handle immediately flew open, and I was discovered lying on the ground, with the candle still alight, on the ground beside me. My aunt experienced no difficulty in blowing out the refractory candle, and I was carried with the greatest tenderness into the other wing of the house, where I slept that night. Little was said about the incident next day, but all who knew of it expressed in their faces the utmost anxiety, an anxiety which, now that I had recovered, greatly puzzled me. On our return home, another shock awaited me. We found, to our dismay, that my mother was seriously ill, and that the doctor, who had been sent for from Perth the previous evening, just about the time of my adventure with the candle, had stated that she might not survive the day. His warning was fulfilled. She died at sunset. Her death, of course, may have had nothing at all to do with the candle episode. Yet it struck me then as an odd coincidence, and seems all the more strange to me after hearing your account of the boggle that touched your dear father in the road, so near the spot where the Holkit's house once stood. I could never discover whether Lady Holkit or her daughters ever saw anything of a superphysical nature in their house. After my experience, they were always very reticent on what subject, and naturally, I did not like to press it. On Lady Holkit's death, Margaret and Alice sold the house, which was eventually pulled down, as no one would live in it, and I believe the ground on which it stood is now a turnip field. That, my dear, is all I can tell you. Now, Mr. O'Donnell, Miss MacDonald added, having heard our experiences, my mother's and mine, what is your opinion? Do you think the phenomena of the candle was in any way connected with the bauble both you and I have seen? Or are the hauntings of the old White House entirely separate from those of the road? Case 2. The top attic in Pringle's mansion in Burke, Scotland. As we continue, we are reading Scottish ghost stories written by Elliot MacDonald. A charming lady, Miss South, informs me that no house interested her more as a child than Pringle's mansion in Edinburgh. Pringle's mansion, by the by, is not the real name of the house, nor is it the original building that's still standing. The fact is, my friend has been obliged to disguise the locality for fear of an action for slander of title, such as happened in the Egwin case of 1904 to 1907. Miss South never saw, save in a picture, the house that so fascinated her, but through repeatedly hearing about it from her old nurse, she felt that she knew it by heart, and used to amuse herself hour after hour in the nursery, drawing diagrams of the rooms and passages, which, to make quite realistic, she named and numbered. There was the Admiral's room, Madame's room, Miss Ophelia's room, Master Gregory's room, Letty's, which was the nurse's room, the cook's room, the butler's room, the housemaid's room, and the haunted room. The house was very old, probably the 16th century, and was concealed from the thoroughfare by a high wall that enclosed it on all sides. It had no garden, only a large yard covered with faded yellow paving stones, and containing a well with an old-fashioned roller and bucket. When the well was cleaned out, an event which took place periodically on a certain date, every utensil in the house was called into requisition for ladling out in the water, and the Admiral himself supervising, made every servant in the establishment take an active part in the proceedings. On one of these occasions, the Admiral announced his intention of going down to the well in the bucket. That was a rare moment in Letty's life, for when the Admiral had been let down in the bucket, the rope broke. Indeed, the thought of what the Laird would say when he came up almost resulted in his not coming up at all. However, someone rather bolder than the rest retained sufficient presence of mind to effect the rescue, and the timid ones, thankfully enough to survive the explosion, had to be content on half rations till further orders. But in spite of its association with such a martinet, and in spite of her ghostly experiences in it, Letty loved the house, and was never tired of singing its praises. It was a 2-story mansion, with roomy cellars, but no basement. There were 4 reception rooms, all oak-paneled on the ground floor, numerous kitchen offices, including a cozy housekeeper's room, and a capacious entrance hall, in the center of which stood a broad oak staircase. The cellars, 3 in number, and chiefly used as lumber rooms, were deep down and dank and horrid. On the first floor, 8 bedrooms opened onto a gallery overlooking the hall, and the top story where the servants slept consisted solely of attics connected with one another by dark, narrow passages. It was one of these attics that was haunted, although, as a matter of fact, the ghost had been seen in all parts of the house. When Letty entered the Admiral's service, she was all but a bairn, and had never even heard of ghosts, nor did the other servants apprise her of the hauntings, having received strict injunctions not to do so from Laird. But Letty's home, humble though it was, had been very bright and cheerful, and the dark precincts of the mansion filled her with dismay. Without exactly knowing why she was afraid, she shrank in terror from descending into the cellars, and felt anything but pleased at the prospect of sleeping alone in the attic. Still, nothing occurred to really alarm her, till about a month after her arrival. It was early in the evening, soon after twilight, and she had gone down into one of the cellars to look for a bootjack. The Admiral swore by all that was holy must be found for supper. Placing the night she had brought with her on a packing case, she was groping about among the boxes when she perceived, to her astonishment, that the flame of the candle had suddenly turned blue. She then felt icy cold, and was much startled on hearing a loud clatter as some metal instrument on the stone floor in the far-off corner of the cellar. Glancing in the direction of the noise, she saw, looking at her, 2 eyes, 2 obliquely set, lurid light eyes, full of the utmost devilry. Sick with terror and utterly unable to account for what she beheld, she stood stock still, her limbs refusing to move, her throat parched, her tongue tied. The clang was repeated, and a shadowy form began slowly to crawl towards her. She dared not afterwards surmise what would have happened to her, had not the Laird himself come down at this moment. At the sound of his stentorian voice, the phantasm vanished. But the shock had been too much for Letty. She fainted, and the Admiral, carrying her upstairs as carefully as if she had been his own daughter, gave peremptory orders that she should never again be allowed to go to the cellar alone. But now that Letty herself had witnessed the manifestation, the other servants no longer felt bound to secrecy, and soon poured into her ears endless accounts of the hauntings. Everyone, they informed her, except Master Gregory and Perkins the butler, had seen one or other of the ghosts, and the cellar apparition was quite familiar to them all. They also declared that there were other parts of the house quite as badly haunted as the cellar, and it might have been partly owing to these gruesome stories that poor Letty always felt scared. When crossing the passages leading to the attics, as she was hastening down one of them, early one morning, she heard someone running after her, thinking it was one of the other servants. She turned round, pleased to think that someone else was up early too, and saw to her horror a dreadful-looking object that seemed to be partly human and partly animal. The body was quite small, and its face bloated and covered with yellow spots. It had an enormous animal mouth, the lips of which, moving furiously without emanating any sound, showed that the creature was endeavoring to speak but could not. The moment Letty screamed for help, the phantasm vanished. But her worst experience was yet to come. The spare attic, which she was told was so badly haunted that no one would sleep in, was the room next to hers. It was a room Letty could well believe was haunted, for she had never seen another equally gloomy room in her life. The ceiling was low and sloping, the window tiny, and the walls exhibited all sorts of odd nooks and crannies. A bed, antique and worm-eaten, stood in its own recess, a black oak chest in another, and at right angles with a door in another recess stood a wardrobe that used to creak and groan alarmingly every time Letty walked along a passage. Once she heard a chuckle, a low diabolical chuckle, which she fancied came from the chest, and once, when the door of the room was opened, she caught the glitter of a pair of eyes, the same pale, malevolent eyes that had so frightened her in the cellar. From her earliest childhood, Letty had been periodically given to somnambulism, and one night, just about a year after she went into service, she got out of bed and walked in her sleep into the haunted room. She awoke to find herself standing cold and shivering in the middle of the floor, and it was some seconds before she realized where she was. Her horror, when she did discover where she was, is not easily described. The room was bathed in moonlight, and the beams, falling with noticeable brilliance on each piece of furniture the room contained, at once riveted Letty's attention, and so fascinated her that she found herself utterly unable to move. A terrible and most unusual silence predominated everywhere, and, although Letty's senses were wonderfully and painfully on the alert, she could not catch the slightest sound from any of the rooms on the landing. The night was absolutely still. No breath of wind, no rustle of leaves, no flapping of ivy against the window. Yet the door suddenly swung back on its hinges and slammed furiously. Letty felt that this was the work of some supernatural agency, and, fully expecting that the noise had awakened the cook, who was a light sleeper, or pretended she was, listened in a fever of excitement to hear her get out of bed and call out. The slightest noise and the spell that held her prisoner would, Letty felt sure, be broken. But the same unbroken silence prevailed. A sudden rustling made Letty glance fearfully at the bed, as she perceived, to her terror, the valiance swaying back and forth, violently, to and fro. Sick with fear, she was now constrained to stare in abject helplessness. Presently, there was a slight, very slight movement on the mattress. The white dust cover rose, and, under it, Letty saw the outlines of what she took to be a human figure, gradually take shape. Hoping, praying that she was mistaken, and that what appeared to be on the bed was but a trick of her imagination, she continued staring in agony of anticipation. But the figure remained, extended at full length like a corpse. The minutes slowly passed, a church clock boomed too, and the body moved. Letty's jaw fell, her eyes almost bulged from her head, whilst her fingers closed convulsively on the folds of her nightdress. The unmistakable sound of breathing now issued from the region of the bed, and the dust cover commenced slowly to slip aside. Inch by inch it moved, until first of all Letty saw a few wisps of dark hair, then a few more, then a thick cluster, then something white and shining, a protruding forehead, then dark, very dark brows, then two eyelids, yellow, swollen, and fortunately tightly closed. Then a purple conglomeration of Letty knew not what, of anything but what was human. The sight was so monstrous it appalled her, and she was overcome with a species of awe and repulsion, from which the language of morality has no sufficiently energetic expression. She momentarily forgot what she looked on was merely superphysical, but regarded it as something alive, something that ought to have been a child, comely and healthy as herself, and she hated it. It was an outrage on maternity, a blot on nature, a filthy discredit to the house, a blight, a sore, a gangrene. It turned over in his sleep, the cover was hurled aside, and a grotesque object, round, pulpy, webbed, and of leprous whiteness, an object which Letty could hardly associate with a hand, came groveling out. Letty's stomach heaved. The thing was beastly, indecent, vile. It ought not to live. And the idea of killing flashed through her. mind. Boiling over with indignation, and absurdly forgetful of her surroundings, she turned round and groped for a stone to smash it. The moonlight on her naked toes brought her to her senses. The thing in the bed was a devil. Though brought up a member of the Free Church, with an abhorrence of anything that could in any way be contoured into Papist practices, Letty crossed herself. As she did so, a noise in the passage outside augmented her terror. She strained her ears painfully, and the sound developed into a footstep, soft, light, and repetitious. It came gently towards the door. It paused outside, and Letty intuitively felt that it was listening. Her suspense was now so intolerable that it was almost with a feeling of relief that she beheld the door slowly, very slowly, begin to open. A little wider, and yet a little wider. But still nothing came. Ah! Letty's heart turned to ice. Another inch, and a shadowy something slipped through and began to wriggle itself stealthily over the floor. Letty tried to divert her gaze, but could not. An irresistible magnetic attraction kept her eyes glued to the gradually approaching horror. When within a few feet of her, it halted, and again Letty felt it was listening to the breathing on the bed, which was heavy and bestial. Then it twisted round, and Letty watched it crawl into the wardrobe. After this, there was a long and anxious wait. Then Letty saw the wardrobe door slyly open, and the eyes of the seller, inexpressibly baleful, and glittering like burnished steel in the strong phosphorescent glow of the moon, peep out. Not at her, but through her, at the object lying on the bed. There were not only eyes, this time, but a form, vaguely misty and irregular, but still with sufficient shape to enable Letty to identify it as that of a woman, tall and thin, and with a total absence of hair, which was emphasized in the most lurid and ghastly fashion. With a snake-like movement, the evil thing slithered out of the wardrobe, and, gliding past Letty, approached the bed. Letty was obliged to follow every proceeding. She saw the thing deftly snatch the bolster from under the sleeping head, noted the gleam of hellish satisfaction in its eyes as it pressed the bolster down, and watched the murdered creature's contortions grow fainter and fainter until they finally ceased. The eyes then left the room, and from far off, away below, in the abysmal cellars of the house, came the sound of digging, faint, very faint, but unquestionably digging. This terminated the grim, phantasmal drama for that night at least, and Letty, chilled to the bone, but thoroughly alert, escaped to her room. She spent a few remaining hours of rest, wide awake, determining never to go to the bed again without fastening one of her arms to her staples. With regard to the history of the house, Letty never learned anything more remarkable than that. Followed by idiot child. Again, this is 1811, okay? Just watching my internet snap off. Okay. Again, this was written in the early 1800s, so there's going to be stuff in here that probably doesn't jive well with today. I apologize. Doing my best to get through it and not offend anybody. So please don't turn me in. Again, don't turn me in the TikTok police or Facebook police or anything like that. With regard to the history of the house, Letty never learned anything more remarkable than that. Long ago, a child was supposed to have been murdered in the haunted attic, by whom tradition did not say. The Admiral and his family left Pringle's mansion the year Letty became Miss South's nurse, and as no one would stay in that house, presumably on account of the hauntings, it was pulled down, and an inexcusably inartistic edifice was erected in its place. Case 3. The bounding figure of blank house, near Buckingham Terrace, Edinburgh. Okay, we'll start this one off. No one is more interested in cyclical investigation work than Miss Torfida Vincent, one of the 3 beautiful daughters of Mrs. H. de B. Vincent. who is herself still in the heyday of life, and one of the loveliest of the society women I have ever met. Though I have known her sister several years, I only met Torfrida, for the first time a few months ago, when she was superintending the nursing of her mother, who had just undergone an operation for appendicitis. One day, when I was visiting my convalescent friend, Torfrida informed me that she knew of a haunted house in Edinburgh, a case which she felt sure would arouse my interest and enthusiasm. It is unfortunate, she added, somewhat regretfully, that I cannot tell you the number of the house, but as I have given my word of honor to disclose it to no one. I feel sure you will excuse me. Indeed, my friends, the Gordons, who extracted the promise from me, have got into sad trouble with their landlord for leaving the house under the pretext that it was haunted, and he has threatened to prosecute them for slander of title. The house in question has no claim to antiquity. It may be 80 years old, perhaps a little older, and was, at the time of which I speak, let out in flats. The Gordons occupied the second story. The one above them was untenanted and used as a storage place for furniture, and the first floor and ground floor were divided into chambers and offices. They had not been in their new quarters more than a week when Mrs. Gordon asked the night porter who it was that made such a noise, racing up their stairs between 2 and 3 in the morning. It had awakened her every night, she told him, and she would be glad if the disturbance were discontinued. I'm sorry, madam, but I cannot imagine who it can be, the man replied. Of course, it may be someone next door. Sounds are so often deceptive. No one inhabits the rooms above you. But Mrs. Gordon was not at all convinced, and made up her mind to complain to the landlord, should it occur again. That night, nothing happened. But the night after, she was roused again from her sleep at 2 a.m. by a feeling that something dreadful, some dire catastrophe, was about to take place. The house was very still, and beyond the faraway echoes of a policeman's patrol on the hard pavement outside, nothing, absolutely nothing, broke the universal, and as it seemed to her, unnatural silence. Generally, at night time, there are sounds one likes to assure oneself are too trivial to be heard during the day. The creaking of boards, stairs, nearly always stairs, and the tapping of some leaf, of course some leaf, at the windows. Who has not heard such sounds, and who in his heart of hearts has not been only too well aware that they are nocturnal, exclusively nocturnal? The shadows of evening bring with them visitors, prying, curious visitors, grim and ghastly visitors, gray esoteric visitors, visitors from a world seemingly inconsequent, wholly incomprehensible. Mrs. Gordon did not believe in ghosts. She scoffed at the idea of ghosts, and, like so many, would-be wits, unreasonably brave by day, and the reverse by night, had hitherto attributed banshees and the like to cats and other animals. But now when all was dark, pitch dark, and hushed, and she, for aught she knew, to the contrary, the only one in that great rambling building, awake, she reviewed again, and again in her mind, that rushing up the stairs. The wind. It could not have been the wind. The wind shuts doors and rattles windows and moans and sighs and howls and screeches, but it does not walk the house in boots. Neither do rats. And if she had imagined the noises, why did she not imagine other things? Why, for example, did she not see the tables dance and tea-turns walk? All that would be fancy, unblushing, genuine fancy. And if she conjured up one absurdity, why not another? That was a conundrum for any skeptic. Thus did she argue, naturally and logically, in the unique sensible fashion of a lawyer or a scientist. Yet, all the while, her senses told her that the atmosphere of the house had undergone some profoundly subtle and unaccountable change, a change that had brought with it a presence, and one sinister and hostile. She longed to strike a light and awake one of her daughters, Diana, by preference, since Diana was the least likely to mind being disturbed and had the strongest nerves. She made a start, and, loosening the bedclothes that she always liked tightly around her, thrust out a quivering toe. The next instant, she drew it back with a tiny gasp of terror. The cold darkness without had suggested to her mind a great horny hand, mal-shaped and murderous, that was lying in wait to seize her. A deadly sickness overcame her, and she lay back on the pillow, her heart beating with outrageous irregularity and loudness. Very slowly she recovered, and, holding her breath, sidled to the far edge of the bed, and with a mysterious movement engendered by the deep desperation of fear, made a lightning-like dab in the direction of the electric bell. Her soft pink finger missed the mark, and coming in violent contact with the wall, bent the carefully polished nail. She bit her lips to stop a cry of pain, and shrinking back within the folds of her dainty lace-embroidered nightdress, abandoned herself to despair. Her consciousness of the unknown presence increased, and she instinctively felt the thing pass through the closed door, down to the landing outside, when it dashed upstairs with a loud clatter, and, entering the lumber room immediately overhead, began bounding as if its feet were tied together, backwards and forwards across the floor. After continuing for fully half an hour, the noises abruptly ceased, and the house resumed its accustomed quiet. At breakfast, Mrs. Gordon asked her daughters if they had heard anything in the night, and they laughingly said, no, not even a mouse. There was now an intermission of the disturbances, and no further demonstration occurred for about a month. Diana was then sleeping in her mother's room, Mrs. Gordon being away on a visit to Lady Voss, who was entertaining a party of friends at her shooting box in Argyle. One evening, as Diana was going into her bedroom to prepare for the dinner, she saw the door suddenly swing open, and something, she could not tell what, it was so blurred and distinct, come out with a bound. Tearing past her onto the landing, it rushed upstairs with so much clatter that Diana imagined, though she could not see nothing, that it must have on its feet heavy lumbering boots. Filled with an irresistible curiosity, in spite of her alarm, Diana ran after it, and, on reaching the upper story, heard it making a terrific racket in the room above the one in which she now slept. Nothing daunted, however, she boldly approached, and flinging open the door, perceived its filmy outline standing before a shadowy and very antique eight-day clock, which apparently it was in the habit of winding. A great fear now fell on Diana. What was this thing? And supposing it should turn around and face her, what should she see? She was entirely isolated from her sisters, and the servants, alone in the light fading, in a big, gloomy room full of strange old furniture which suggested hiding places for all sorts of grim possibilities. She was assured now that the thing she had followed was nothing human. Neither was it a delusion, for her when she shut her eyes and opened them. It was still there, and, oddly enough, it was now more distinct than it had been when she had seen it downstairs. A curious feeling of helplessness stole over Diana. The power of speech forsook her, and her limbs grew rigid. She was so fearful, too, of attracting the notice of the mysterious thing, that she hardly dared breathe, and each pulsation of her heart sent cold chills of apprehension down her spine. Once she endured agonies through a mad desire to sneeze, and once her lips opened to scream at something suspiciously like the antennae of a huge beetle, and which she subsequently discovered was a devil's coach horse, tickled the calf of her leg. She fancied, too, that all sorts of queer shapes lurked in the passage behind her, and that innumerable unseen eyes were malignantly rejoicing in her terror. At last, the climax to her suspense seemed at hand. The unknown thing, until now too busy with the clock to take heed of her, paused for a moment or so, as if undecided what to do next, and then slowly began to veer round. But the faint echo of a voice below, calling her by name, broke the hypnotic spell that bound Diana to the floor, and with a frantic spring she cleared the threshold of the room. She then tore madly down the stairs, never halting till she reached the dining room, where she sank on a sofa, and, more dead than alive, panted out to hear her amazed sisters panted out to her amazed sisters a full account of all that had transpired. That night, she shared her sister's bedroom, but neither she nor her sister slept. From this time till the return of Mrs. Gordon, nothing happened. It was one evening after she came back, when she was preparing to get into bed, that the door of her own room unexpectedly opened, and she saw standing on the threshold the unmistakable figure of a man, short and broad, with a great width of shoulders, and very long arms. He was clad in a pea-jacket, blue serge, trousers, and jack-boots. He had a big, round, brutal head covered with a tangled mass of yellow hair, but where his face ought to have been, there was only a blotch, underlying which Mrs. Gordon detected the semblance to something fiendishly vindictive and immeasurably nasty. But, in spite of the horror his appearance produced, her curiosity was aroused with regard to the two objects he carried in his hands, one of which looked like a very bizarre bundle of red and white rags, and the other a small bladder of lard. While she was standing and staring at them in dumb awe, he swung round, and, reaching them savagely under his armpits, rushed across the landing, and with a series of apish bounds, sprang up the staircase and disappeared into the gloom. This was the climax. Mrs. Gordon felt that another such encounter would kill her. So, in spite of the fact that she had taken the flat for a year, and had only just commenced her tenancy, she packed up her goods and left the very next day. The report that the building was haunted spread rapidly, and Mrs. Gordon had many indignant letters from the landlord. She naturally made inquiries as to the early history of the house, but of the many tales she listened to, only one, the authenticity of which she could not guarantee, seemed to suggest any clue to the haunting. It was said that a retired captain in the merchant service many years previously had rented the room she had occupied. He was an extraordinary individual, and, despite the fact that he had lived so far inland, would never wear any but nautical clothes, blue jersey and trousers, reefer coat and jack-boots. But this was not his only peculiarity. His love of grog eventually brought on delirium tremens, and his excessive irritability in the interval between each attack was a source of anxiety to all who came in contact with him. At that time, there happened to be a baby in the rooms overhead, whose crying so annoyed the captain that he savagely informed its mother that if she did not keep it quiet, he would not be answering for the consequences. His warnings having no effect, he flew upstairs one day when she was temporarily absent, and snatching up the bread knife from the table, unalive the infant. He then stuffed parts of its body into a grandfather's clock, which stood in one corner of the room. And, remember, I'm just reading this stuff, okay? Don't get upset. Don't turn me into the police, okay? I'm reading from a book written in 1811. Okay? So let me get in there. I must have hit it. Let's see. Okay. Which stood in one corner of the room, and, retiring to his own quarters, drank till he was insensible. He was, of course, arrested on a charge of murder, but being found insane, he was committed during His Majesty's pleasure to a lunatic asylum. He eventually committed suicide, unalived himself, by opening an artery in his leg with one of his fingernails. Okay? As the details of this tragedy filled in so well with the phenomenon they had witnessed, the Gordons could not help regarding the story as a very probable explanation of the hauntings. But remember, its authenticity is dubious. All right, that's it for this weekend. Let me close this down. There we go. I want to thank everybody for coming today. Everybody on TikTok. Are you kidding me? Fine. Oh, God, right in the middle of my live. Right in the middle of my live, I gotta verify. What is up with that? Okay, that's never happened before, guys. I'm sorry. Anyway, we're done. I'm crooked here because I had to hit the button to verify. Don't know what that's about. Never had to do that before. That was silly. Let me get you guys put right. Hang on. Okay. Anyway, sorry about that. I had to verify. But I'm really going to fall off too because everything's off balance. Just hang there with me. We're almost done anyway. Anyway, I want to thank everybody for coming tonight and listening. And this is going to fall over because it's not in the right spot. Okay, I'm going to move over a little bit. Anyway, let's thank you. That's a TikTok roll. Anyway, let's... You're just going to fall off the way this is going. Is it going? Okay. Anyway, I want to thank everybody for coming, and next week I'll make sure that we get this thing straightened out, and if they're not, make me verify again. That was uncool. But I want to... Damn, all the heck. Anyway, I want to thank everybody for coming, and this is not the way it was supposed to end. TikTok, I apologize. Hopefully you don't fall again. I'm going to go ahead and get off TikTok here because it's giving me problems. And we'll fix this. But thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. I'll see you next week. Tomorrow we're going to be doing a regular show on California Haunts Radio. That's going to be at 6:30 p.m. Pacific. And the address, if you guys are TikTok are interested, is youtube.com/@California Haunts Radio. We do a show every evening, Sunday through Friday. And tomorrow's guest is going to be Dr. Linda Selvin, and we're going to be talking about spirit attachments. Okay, so we'll be talking about that tomorrow. So I'll see you guys on TikTok tomorrow, hopefully. Okay, bye bye. Thanks for coming. I appreciate it. Okay. Well, that was some insane stuff tonight. I apologize. Anyway, I'll see you guys tomorrow, 6:30 p.m. Pacific, and didn't have a lot of viewers on TikTok today, but it happens, so we'll see what we got. Usually I have more than that. I don't know, my numbers have been down. Anyway, I will see you guys tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. Pacific with Dr. Linda Selvin, and we're going to be talking about spiritual attacks and spiritual attachments. Thanks, guys, for coming. If you like the show, share it with 5 people. If you hated the show, share it with 5 of your enemies. Equal opportunity here. Okay, I will see you guys tomorrow, and have a great rest of your evening, and...